The meeting. The meeting droned on for what I could call an eternity, and I began to doze a little, which was interrupted by an elbow or two. The only enlightenment that I got was when Mr. Roman Heinrich went straight into his report, and immediately all the fatigue just evaporated from my form. Surprisingly, I was more alert, easily grasping the knowledge of the financial status of the company and the solutions put in place to elevate us to a better standing for the future. Eventually it was Ronnie's turn to present the creative brief. She was sharp and to the point, as the head of the graphics department should be, in that simple polite manner that she has. I was elated to accompany her as one of the graphic designers under her belt. She was on top of her game like a certain Mr. Heinrich, who I could not get out of my mind. Panic flooded me instantly, remembering his last words, eyes bulging once again. I tried desperately to slow the words of the presenters in my head, so that I couldn't face my boss at the end of the meeting, but I was torn between wanting to see him, and the fear of seeing him. At war with myself, I didn't realize the meeting had ended. Everyone had filed out of the room, and Mr. Heinrich was waiting patiently with his hands in his pants pocket for me to join him at the door. "Oh my gosh, I'm screwed," I whispered in a high-pitched, timidly tortured voice. Thankfully, he didn't hear me this time because I was halfway to the door. His scent greeted me again. Closing my eyes while drawing in a deep breath, I became lightheaded, and by the time I got to Mr. Heinrich I had dreamy, bright eyes staring at him, which was happily met by a half-smile on a squarely chiseled face. Maybe this was not going to be so bad, I thought to myself. He pushed up the door to his office, which was across from the boardroom we were in. His office was quaint. All beige walls, a simple hardwood desk that was at the center, but close to the back of the room in front of a gigantic glass window. His laptop and printer were sprawled on the top of the dark brown hardwood. We walked until he rounded his desk and sat down to immediately immerse himself in paperwork. I simply sat down in a rather large comfortable chair that was in front of his desk, in front of him. I heard strange music in the background radiating around the room. It sounded erotic and in another language. Everyone at the office was accustomed to Mr. Heinrich speaking German all the time, so I knew it wasn't German. It sounded more like Russian. We were around his large, what looked like mahogany desk. I scratched nervously at the surface of the desk, staring at his gold-filled nameplate while he scanned through paperwork strewn in front of him. The tension was building in the room, and I haven't the slightest idea if he felt it as well, until I heard the soft creak in the wheels of his chair move. He looked up from his paperwork at last. There in his icy blue eyes I saw something flicker for a moment as he rose from his chair. "Miss Sauvignon, could you step around the desk for me, please?" he asked as he outstretched one large hand in front of me. I was stunned for a few seconds before my brain decided to function again. My reflection was in the foggy glass that took up majority of the wall behind Roman, and a breathtaking picture of the wet city during a light rainfall was our view. I reluctantly took his hand and lavished in the feeling because I felt tingles run up my hand. He escorted me around the desk and had me facing the massive bulletproof glass. I was beginning to feel a bit anxious because I was unsure of his motives. Then he began to speak. "Do you know why you're here?" he pressed. A tiny lilt in his question, accentuating his Germanic background. I shook my head up and down like a child being scolded. Good. I am to understand that you take your job as a joke. My eyes bulged at his question, or maybe it was the sternness of his voice. He could see me in the glass reflection, so he wouldn't miss my reactions as he continued to exercise his right as CEO. I find that hard to believe due to your outrageous behavior earlier. Am I to believe that you are incapable of behaving in a professional manner, or are you just this ill-mannered and the recruiting department is lacking in their ability to do their job to let a foul mouth like yourself get loose in my company? I was fuming at the end of his rant. Anger oozed out of my pores as the temperature in the room went from cool to scorching hot. I could see my ears turn red. I swung around only to feel a stinging sensation in the palm of my hand. I knew it was red from the hit and I would have to ice it later at home. I had smacked him across the face and my breathing was shallow and ragged from my temperament. I just saw his head whip to the side, his eyes closed and reopened with that earlier glint in them. He was livid and the slight crease between his eyebrows gave it away. He stepped forward. Then something strange happened. He swung me back around and backed me up against the cold glass suddenly. He pressed up against me. I felt hot all over, but my cheek and the front of my body were cold from the glass closet. It was as if the cool surface of the glass on my face melted a part of the heat circulating in my brain. I could somewhat think clearly now and I could feel him. He was hard against the small of my back, just like in my dream. I was frightened. Until he whispered ever so leisurely in my ear. "Dijk mijn kachen, word ich samen." Then I felt something, his tongue on the edge of ear. It startled me, until he began to nip at my ear. I shivered and moaned a bit loudly and absent-mindedly gyrated my hips against his immense hard-on that was resting on my ass. It twitched. I closed my eyes for a second before he exclaimed, "Look at me Kachin." And so I did in the glass in front of me. My breath hitched as he began to rotate his hips into me. It is slow and my treacherous body began to liquefy. He moved his left hand around my body as if to memorize every curve that belonged to me. Starting from my left breast he squeezed and pulled at the sensitive nipple. "Du gehorst zu mir, Kachin," he whispered again in my ear. I could almost scream in pleasure, but I just moaned again. My head fell back onto his broad chest. His hand began to slowly roam down my body as he kissed and nipped at my neck. I was gone. Shivers ran up and down my spine. I felt my skirt begin to lift gently and a rough hand slip beneath it. His hand was very warm as it slid up my thigh, nearing my delicate core. I gasped as he finally touched me. He continued to mutter incoherent German onto my neck. He shifted my soaked thong with his skilled fingers and found my delicate bundle of nerves, which he commenced rubbing. I almost went over the edge immediately. My back bowed and my knees gave way slightly, but he caught me with his right hand. Chuckling lightly, he continued to pressure my core with his finger. Thumb rubbing deliberate circles into my clit and his middle finger pushed against my flesh until it was buried inside me. Tears filled my eyes as I came with a loud cry. He withdrew his hand quickly and stepped back from me with a wicked smirk on his face that I could see in the glass. I could have died from embarrassment. I swiftly straightened my skirt and hair, and when I turned to face my boss he was still smirking at me, but this time he was sucking the tips of his fingers off individually. Middle finger first, then thumb. "So sweet," he whispered. I was beet red. I couldn't think straight, much less comprehend what just happened. My world crashed around me when I realized what had just happened a moment ago. Then I heard him say, You're fired.